The last part of the Impressionist movement that we're going to talk about is what is known as symbolism. And symbolism is an international movement in art and in literature. Both artists and writers will address irrational fears, desires, and impulses of the human mind in their work. It inspired by the use of emotionally potent images of romantic artists, yet while using some universal symbols in their artwork, they also encourage individual interpretation. So there was, with symbolism, there's a freedom of imagination, expressionism is important, and bending the use of form. So form becomes less important for the symbolist. They are going to be, there's going to be a fascination with the dark recesses of the human psyche that emerged in the late 19th century. It encompasses photographic and scientific examinations of nature. It also is exploring the nature of insanity, as well as popular interest in the spiritual world of mediums. And all of this is kind of because of the publishing of Sigmund Freud's work and his ideas of psychoanalysis. His pioneering book was called The Interpretations of Dreams, and many people read it during this period. The symbolists will seek a deeper and more mysterious reality from everyday life, which they conveyed through strange and ambiguous subject matter, stylized forms that suggest hidden or elusive meaning. Symbolism artists also sought to escape from modern life in irrational worlds of unrestrained emotion. They rejected value placed on rationalism and material progress in Western culture, choosing instead to explore irrational realms of emotion, imagination, and spirituality. They often compared their works to dreams. They do stage independent art exhibitions like the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist, but the groups were rather small in the late 19th century, and unlike the Impressionists who rented out space, advertised, printed programs, and charged even a small admission fee, the symbolists mounted modest shows and had little expectation of public interest. For example, they would just hang a few works of art in a cafe near the grounds of the 1889 Universal Exhibition, but nobody really knew about it, and it really went unnoticed by the press. So for symbolism, they're going to seek a deeper, more mysterious reality. It definitely depends on esoteric, or you have to know what the background is on the artist and what they want. The exotic, the mysterious, visionary, and dreamlike. And our major artists that we'll talk about for symbolism is Edvard Munch and Gustav Klimt. So we're going to start with Edvard Munch, and this is the Scream. On the left, there's a few other pieces that he did that aren't as iconic, but it kind of shows the expressionism that we're talking about with this. Edvard Munch developed a highly personal style that reflected his own strong emotions and troubled personality. In this painting, The Scream, in which a skull-like figure screams in agony, has also really come to represent the anxiety and fear of the modern age. It's now considered an iconic painting, often quoted and often parodied. You see a lot of parodies of this one. Background on Edvard Munch. He was born in 1863 in Norway. His mother died when he was young, and he had siblings. And his father was puritanical, which means he was very religious, and also he intended to tell really scary ghost stories to an impressionable child who had just lost his mother. So it kind of messed with his psyche, so to speak. So this is his most important work. The Scream was one of over 20 different paintings that he exhibited as a coordinated group in the early 20th century. And his exhibition was called Motifs from the Life of the Modern Soul. So Munch's intention was to represent the flowering and passing of love, anxiety, and death. The screen dates to 1910. It's only 3 feet by 2 feet. It's tempera on board, at least the original was. There's a few more of these, and those are oil on canvas. There are harsh swirling colors in its form, and then the lines direct the viewer kind of all over the painting, but mostly it brings you back for your attention to the haunting head at the center. The composition expresses the personal anxiety of the artist by creating formal tension that reinforces the psychological tension that is the theme of this work. Munch described the sky as blood red, and the rhythms of the sky melt into the waters of the fjord. That's spelled Fjord. That's what they call the water inlets in the Norwegian countries. The flatness of the bridge is unnatural with the rest of the picture. The bridge and the background figures are supposed to be clearly part of a separate realm and separate from the man screaming. It's like nobody can hear him. The body of the man itself, it blends into the rhythms of the environment and is for Munch an existential symbol. He's becoming one with nature, yet separated from humanity. As he screams, his face resembles a skull with the iconographic association of death. This is supposed to represent the symbol of a psychological state. Munch definitely felt this psychological state. He did suffer from depression. He was an alcoholic with a dread of open spaces. He had suffered great personal losses, including both his mother and sister at a young age. He often described himself as being pulled into an environment and losing his identity often. Munch is highly regarded for his exploration of dark themes, including alienation, sin, and human vulnerability. His use of vivid colors aren't natural. Those colors are supposed to allow us to feel what this man is feeling. It gives an emotional power to the subject matter, and this paves the way for an entirely new attitude towards art in the 20th century. For him, emotionally expressive and abstract forms were a way of creating art that possessed a deeper meaning. And his art had a profound impact on early modern painting. Many later artists looked to Munch as a model for a new strain of modern art which will be known as Expressionism. Expressionists value process over polish. They mix realism with abstraction. So like we could tell that this is a man, or we could see the figures in the background and maybe even ships in the fjord, but the colors and the swirling lines and the actual shape of the man is not realistic. And so all of that will blend into being like expressing a feeling of anxiety and frightening. I mean, this is one of the most powerful pieces in art. One of the things he also, besides trying to express extreme emotion, is that Munch probably had the condition known as synesthesia. It's spelled Synesthesia. I believe I mentioned it in a previous piece, but this is a union of the senses. It's basically where you can, at the same time, like you could taste a color or smell a musical note or hear color. I mean, it's just your senses mix up what they're supposed to do, and it's not an uncommon thing. Kandinsky, will definitely talk about it when we get to him. He also had synesthesia. And so the result of this in the visual depiction of sound and emotion is something that he's trying to express. So the scream represents a key work for the Symbolist movement, as well as an important inspiration for the expressionist movements of the early 20th century. Symbolist artists of diverse international backgrounds confronted questions regarding the nature of the subjectivity and visual backgrounds confronted, its visual depictions. As Munch himself put succinctly in a notebook entry on subjective vision written in 1889, he said, "It is not a chair which is to be painted, but what the human being has felt in relation to it." He also brought to his work very current attitudes toward sex, psychological disturbances, the occult, spirituality, and utopian politics. Now, later on, expressionist art was censored by the Third Reich, or Nazi Germany, and it was deemed a cultural pollutant, and they're going to confiscate his work. When Norway was invaded, Munch's property was seized, although Munch was able to stay in his studio, and he died in 1944 at the age of 80. Now, he did suffer from alcoholism, as I said before, and open spaces, which allowed him to have like great personal losses. I mean, he couldn't really pull himself together. So he often described himself as being pulled into his environment and losing his identity. Munch is highly regarded for his exploration of dark themes of alienation, sin, and human vulnerability. The most important thing is his vivid use of color, which intensifies the emotion and power of the subject matter, which will help pave the way for an entirely new attitude during the early 20th century. For him, emotionally expressive and abstract forms were a way of creating art that possessed a deeper meaning. And his art had a profound effect on early modern painting. And then you could see on this piece, I have a quote from him, and it says, "I was walking along the road with two friends. The sun set, and I felt a tinge of melancholy. Suddenly the sky became a bloody red. I stopped, leaned against the railing dead tired, and I looked into the flaming clouds that hung like blood and a sword over the blue-black fjord of the city. My friends walked on, but I stood there trembling with fright, and I felt a loud ending scream piercing nature." And for anyone who's had an anxiety attack or seen someone have an anxiety attack, he's describing exactly what it feels like. And I think that's why this piece resonates with so many people, is that it's a universal form of showing anxiety. Okay, so that was the Symbolist movement and the scream. There's one more Symbolist piece we'll talk about on our next screencast.